Hey there, before we dive into this story, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. This is a story that could have happened anywhere tornadoes strike, and I want to know where you're tuning in from. On April 15th, 2024, an 85-year-old woman named Margaret Ellen Thompson stood at a construction site in Oklahoma City, her weathered hands gripping a faded photograph. The backhoe had stopped. Workers stood in a circle, silent. They'd just uncovered something that shouldn't exist, a storm cellar that wasn't on any city map from 1947. Margaret touched the photo, a smiling 8-year-old girl in a gingham dress, blonde pigtails, gap-toothed grin. "That's my sister," she whispered. "Dorothy May. She was holding my hand when the siren started. 77 years ago, on April 9th, 1947, an F4 tornado tore through the Woodlawn Park neighborhood in 18 minutes. 116 people died, but 6 people simply vanished. Never found, never buried, never grieved properly. Dorothy May Thompson was one of them. Age 8, last seen running toward home. For 77 years, Margaret visited this empty lot every April 9th, standing where her childhood home once stood, where she last saw her little sister alive. "Today," she told the construction foreman, tears streaming down her lined face, "today, I finally get to bring her home." Because what that backhoe just uncovered would rewrite everything Oklahoma thought it knew about that terrible day in 1947. Not all the missing were victims of the tornado, and the truth had been buried, literally, under this parking lot for 77 years. The neighborhood that disappeared, Woodlawn Park, in the spring of 1947, was a working-class neighborhood on Oklahoma City's south side. 134 modest homes arranged in a neat grid. Population, approximately 580 people. Families of oil field workers, packing house employees, railroad men. 3 dirt roads connected them to the rest of the city. The neighborhood divided naturally into 3 sections. The lower end, near the Canadian River, housed newer families in smaller homes. The middle section along Walker Avenue held established families in slightly larger houses with storm cellars, those underground shelters that were supposed to keep you safe when the sky turned violent. The upper end contained a few 2-story homes of foremen and shift supervisors. Among the 580 residents were people whose names would haunt Oklahoma for decades. Dorothy May Thompson lived at 412 South Walker Avenue with her parents Robert and Alice and her older sister Margaret. Dorothy was small for her age, blonde pigtails that her mother braided every morning, that gap-toothed smile that lit up photographs. She collected buttons, had over 200 of them in a blue tin box she kept on her windowsill. Every button had a story. The pearly white ones came from Mrs. Henderson's old coat. The red ones with gold thread came from her grandmother's wedding dress. Dorothy loved singing "You Are My Sunshine" while helping her mother hang laundry in the backyard. She was terrified of thunderstorms, but brave about everything else. Would climb trees, catch frogs, race the boys down Walker Avenue, and usually win. Her father, Robert, worked the night shift at the Armour packing house. Her mother, Alice, took in laundry to make extra money. They'd moved to Woodlawn Park 3 years earlier, escaping harder times in Arkansas. Things were getting better. Dorothy was doing well in school. Margaret wanted to work in a bank someday. The future looked bright. 3 houses down lived Ruth Harrison and her 6-year-old son, Sammy. Ruth was a seamstress taking in work from neighbors, sitting at her machine late into the night to make ends meet. Her husband had died in the war. Sammy was her entire world. Sammy had bright red hair and freckles scattered across his nose like constellations. He was slower than other children, what we'd now recognize as developmental delays. He rarely spoke, communicated mostly through expressions and gestures. But his mother understood every look, every movement. She could read him like other people read books. Sammy loved following his mother around the house, handing her pins and thread while she worked. He had a remarkable memory for patterns, could look at a quilt design once and remember every piece. His teacher, Miss Perkins, said he'd drawn the entire neighborhood from memory, every house in the correct position. The drawing was remarkably accurate for a 6-year-old, especially one that doctors said was simple. Ruth Harrison would defend her son with fierce maternal instinct. When other mothers whispered that Sammy should be in a special school, Ruth would smile tightly and say, "My son sees the world differently, that doesn't make him less." Further down Walker Avenue, at 623 South Walker, lived the Foster family, Mother Helen, Father William, and 4 children. The eldest was 14-year-old Carolyn, tall for her age, responsible, the kind of girl who babysat neighborhood kids and always got paid because parents trusted her. She helped her mother cook dinner every night. She braided her younger sister's hair. She was saving money for secretarial school. On April 8, 1947, Carolyn woke with a mild fever. Nothing serious, just enough to keep her home from school. Her mother checked on her every hour, brought her soup, felt her forehead. By evening, the fever was breaking. By morning, she'd be fine. Nearby lived 11-year-old Jimmy Carver with his father and stepmother. Jimmy had a reputation, troublemaker, teachers called him. Caught stealing from the general store twice. Started fights at school. But people who knew him well saw a different story. A boy whose mother died when he was 6. A father who worked long hours and didn't notice much. A stepmother who was strict, cold, never quite accepted him. Jimmy acted out because he hurt. But in 1947, nobody really understood that. And at 445 South Walker lived 72-year-old Amos Pritchard, alone in a tiny house with the deepest storm cellar in the neighborhood. Former coal miner, widower, kept to himself. Neighbors called him Old Man Pritchard, not unkindly, just distant. He'd survived the mining accidents that killed his brothers back in Pennsylvania. He'd seen death up close, multiple times, and it had made him cautious. Some said paranoid, others said practical. His storm cellar was legendary. He'd dug it himself in 1932, reinforced it with railroad ties he'd salvaged, built a door from heavy oak and iron hinges that could withstand anything. 15 feet deep, shelves stocked with canned goods, blankets, water, a small table and chair, a ventilation shaft on the south side for air circulation. That cellar could survive a direct bomb hit, Robert Thompson once joked. He wasn't far wrong. But there was one more person in Woodlawn Park that spring, someone nobody knew well but everyone knew of. Vernon Dale Matthews, age 34. Handyman and odd job worker. Vernon lived in a rented room at the Henderson House on the north end of Walker Avenue, fixed plumbing, repaired roofs, helped dig storm cellars for families who'd pay him. Unmarried, quiet, helpful, always helpful. People knew him just enough to trust him. He'd fixed the Thompson family's cellar door, helped Mrs. Foster repair her porch railing, dug drainage ditches for half a dozen families. When he offered to help, people said yes. Why wouldn't they? Vernon was polite, worked hard, charged fair prices. He'd arrived in Woodlawn Park in 1945, said he'd been working oil fields in West Texas before. Nobody questioned it. Plenty of men drifted back then, especially after the war. Vernon kept irregular hours. Some weeks he'd be around constantly. Other weeks he'd disappear, said he was working jobs in nearby towns. Nobody thought much about Vernon Matthews. He was just there, part of the landscape, unremarkable. On April 8, 1947, nobody in Woodlawn Park knew that 24 hours later, their entire world would end. And nobody suspected that one of their helpful neighbors was something far worse than any tornado. The last normal day, April 8, 1947. Dorothy Mae Thompson. Dorothy woke at 6:30 in the morning to the smell of eggs frying in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through her window, hitting the blue button tin on the sill. She'd found 3 new buttons yesterday, pearly white ones from Mrs. Henderson's old coat. She counted them again, whispering the numbers. 203 buttons, each one a tiny treasure. "Dorothy Mae, breakfast," her mother called from downstairs. Margaret was already at the table, braiding her own hair in quick, practiced movements. Dorothy watched enviously. She could never make her own braids look that neat. Her fingers tangled the strands, pulled too tight or too loose. "Can I wear my blue dress today?" Dorothy asked. Her mother glanced at the clothesline through the window. "It's hanging to dry, sweet pea. Wear the gingham." Dorothy made a face but nodded. The gingham dress was nice, yellow checks on white fabric, but the blue one was her favorite, made her feel grown up. After breakfast, she walked to school with Margaret and Sammy Harrison from 3 houses down. Sammy didn't talk much, but he liked holding Dorothy's hand. His grip was gentle, trusting. His mother, Mrs. Harrison, always waved from the porch. "Mind the roads," she'd call, even though they'd walked the same route 100 times. At school, Dorothy's teacher, Miss Campbell, praised her arithmetic. Dorothy beamed, sat up straighter at her desk. She was getting good at numbers. Maybe she'd work in a bank someday, like Margaret wanted to, or maybe she'd be a teacher herself. Help other children learn to add and subtract and multiply. After school, Dorothy helped her mother hang wet sheets in the backyard. The air felt heavy, thick, different than normal. Her mother kept glancing at the sky with the expression Dorothy couldn't read. "Storm coming?" Dorothy asked nervously. Her voice went small when she talked about storms. "Maybe. If it does, we'll just go to the cellar like always. Nothing to worry about." But Dorothy did worry. She always worried about storms. Hated the way the wind howled. Hated the way the sky turned colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Hated feeling small and helpless underground while the world raged above. That evening, her father came home early from his shift at the packing house. That was unusual. He always worked until dawn. "Supervisor sent us home," he said, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. "Weather looks bad tomorrow. Wants everyone rested in case we need to help clean up." Dorothy went to bed at 8 o'clock, her button tin on the nightstand within arm's reach. She fell asleep listening to her parents' muffled voices in the kitchen. They were talking about whether they should pack up, go stay with Aunt Jean in the city if the weather turned dangerous. She never heard what they decided. She never got the chance to ask. April 8th, 1947. Ruth and Sammy Harrison. Ruth Harrison woke at 5 in the morning, as always. Her sewing machine sat in the corner of the small living room, covered with a cloth. Mrs. Foster had commissioned a dress for Carolyn. That girl was growing like a weed, and Ruth needed to finish the hem before Thursday. Sammy woke at 6, padding into the kitchen in his pajamas, bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. He didn't speak, just climbed onto the chair next to Ruth's machine and watched her work. She kissed the top of his red hair. It smelled like the lavender soap she used for his bath the night before. "Good morning, my sweet boy." Sammy smiled. That beautiful, uncomplicated smile that lit up his freckled face. Ruth had learned to read his expressions better than most people read words. Happy meant he'd slept well. Worried meant something at school had upset him. Excited meant he'd seen something interesting. A bird, a bug, a pattern in the clouds. Today he looked happy. She made him oatmeal with brown sugar, his favorite. He ate slowly, methodically. Everything Sammy did was slow, deliberate, careful. Some people in the neighborhood whispered that he was simple, but Ruth knew better. Sammy understood everything. He just processed the world at his own pace. After breakfast, Ruth walked him to school, holding his hand. She always walked him, even though he was 6 and other children his age walked alone. But Sammy needed her. The world was overwhelming sometimes, too loud, too fast, too confusing. Her presence made it manageable. His teacher, Miss Perkins, met them at the door. "Mrs. Harrison," she said warmly. "Sammy did wonderfully with his drawing yesterday. He drew the whole neighborhood, every house in the right place. It's quite remarkable." Ruth looked at the drawing Miss Perkins held. It was remarkable. Every house on Walker Avenue in perfect position, even the trees in the right spots. Sammy had an extraordinary visual memory, could see something once and reproduce it with stunning accuracy. "He sees the world differently," Ruth said softly, "but he sees it clearly." That afternoon she picked him up at 3 o'clock. They walked home slowly, Sammy pausing to examine interesting rocks, touch tree bark, watch ants march across the sidewalk. Ruth never rushed him, let him explore at his own pace. That evening they sat on the porch. The air felt strange. Ruth couldn't quite name it. Heavy, expectant, wrong somehow. Sammy held her hand tighter than usual, pressed close against her side. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mama's right here." They went inside at sunset. Ruth tucked Sammy into bed, sang "Hush, Little Baby," even though he was probably too old for lullabies. He fell asleep holding her hand, his breathing slow and even. Ruth sat at her sewing machine until midnight, finishing Carolyn Foster's dress. The hem was perfect. Tiny, invisible stitches. She was proud of her work. She'd deliver it tomorrow afternoon, she decided, weather permitting. April 8, 1947, Vernon Matthews. Vernon Matthews woke at 4 in the morning in his rented room at the Henderson house. He'd been awake most of the night anyway, listening to his radio crackle with weather reports. Static interrupted the announcer's voice every few minutes, but the message came through clear enough. Storm system developing west of Oklahoma City. Could be bad. Could be nothing. He dressed quietly in the dark, didn't want to wake the Hendersons, and went outside. The pre-dawn air smelled like electricity, like metal, like something wrong. He'd learned to read weather in the oil fields of West Texas. learned which clouds meant rain and which ones meant run. This felt significant. This felt dangerous. This felt like opportunity. At 7 o'clock he knocked on Old Man Pritchard's door. Had to knock 3 times before the old man answered, squinting in the morning light, wearing just his undershirt and suspenders. "What do you want, Matthews?" Pritchard grumbled. "Wondered if you needed help reinforcing your cellar. Storm coming." Pritchard squinted at the western sky. Cloudless for now, but that would change. "Storms always coming in Oklahoma. Cellar's fine. Built it to last. Suit yourself. Offer stands if you change your mind." Vernon spent the day making rounds through the neighborhood, offering to help families secure loose items, check their storm cellars, tighten hinges. Most people were grateful. Vernon was always helpful like that. Always around when you needed something fixed. Never asked for much payment. Just being neighborly. At 3 in the afternoon he stopped by the Thompson house. Margaret answered the door, her hair in those neat braids she wore. "Your storm cellar door looks loose," Vernon said pleasantly, pointing toward their backyard. "Noticed it yesterday when I walked past. Mind if I tighten the hinges? Won't charge you, just being neighborly before this storm hits." Alice Thompson came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's kind of you, Mr. Matthews. Robert's asleep. Worked all night at the packing house. But yes, if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate it." Vernon spent 20 minutes in the Thompsons' yard, working on the cellar door with his tools, testing the hinges, oiling them, making sure they'd open and close smoothly. The cellar was standard. About 8 feet deep, wooden ladder, enough space for a family to huddle during a storm. Not as impressive as Pritchard's, but solid. Dorothy May came outside while he worked, watched him curiously from a safe distance. Small girl, blonde pigtails, gap in her front teeth. "What's your name?" Vernon asked, friendly. "Dorothy May Thompson. I'm 8. That's a nice age. You got a storm cellar in your house?" "Uh-huh. Mama says we have to go down there if the tornado sirens blow." "That's right, always listen to your mama. Storm cellars keep you safe." Dorothy went back inside after a few minutes. Lost interest. Vernon finished the repairs, waved to Alice Thompson through the kitchen window, and moved on to the next house. By evening he'd visited 12 houses, helped secure cellar doors at the Harrisons, the Fosters, the Carvers, moved loose tools that might become projectiles in high winds, reinforced Mrs. Patterson's shaky porch railing. People thanked him. Some offered to pay. He refused payment every time. "Just being neighborly," he'd say with that quiet smile. "Just being neighborly." He went to bed early that night in his rented room, lay in the dark, listening to the radio. The storm was building, the Weather Bureau was getting worried. Vernon could hear it in the announcer's voice, that tension, that understanding that something bad was coming. Tomorrow would be a long day. He could feel it. He was ready. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This case gets much darker, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The sky turns green. April 9th, 1947, 6 a.m. The Oklahoma City Weather Bureau issued their initial forecast at dawn. Severe weather likely this afternoon and evening. Heavy rain, large hail, damaging winds possible. Residents should monitor conditions closely. Nobody in Woodlawn Park panicked. Severe weather warnings were common in Oklahoma in April. Spring meant storms. That was just life on the southern plains. Most people went about their normal routines, breakfast, work, school. Keep an eye on the sky, sure, but no need to panic yet. Alice Thompson heard the forecast while hanging laundry. She paused, looked at the western horizon, then brought the sheets back inside. Better safe than sorry. She told Margaret and Dorothy to come straight home after school. No playing in the neighborhood, no stopping at friends' houses. "Storm might be coming," she said. "Want you close to home." Ruth Harrison heard the forecast while sewing. She decided to keep Sammy home from afternoon activities. He usually went to Mrs. Patterson's house to play with her grandson, but not today. Today he'd stay close, sit beside her sewing machine where she could see him. Carolyn Foster, still home with her mild fever, read on the couch while her mother checked on her every hour. The fever was almost gone. By tomorrow, she'd be back at school. 12 p.m. The Weather Bureau upgraded to a tornado watch for Oklahoma County and surrounding areas. Comma Radio began broadcasting warnings every 15 minutes, interrupting regular programming. "This is a tornado watch. Conditions are favorable for tornado development. Monitor weather conditions. Have a plan to seek shelter." The words were matter-of-fact, bureaucratic, But experienced Oklahomans knew what they meant. It's coming. Be ready. 3D count p.m. The supercell formed west of Oklahoma City, visible on the Weather Bureau's radar. Relatively new technology in 1947, barely understood. But the operators didn't like what they were seeing. Rotation, evident in the storm. Classic hook echo. Moving northeast at 35 miles per hour, directly toward the city. At 3:15, the Weather Bureau issued a severe weather warning. Large tornado spotted 15 miles west of Oklahoma City, moving northeast. Take shelter immediately. This is not a drill. But in 1947, there was no coordinated warning system, no sirens wailing across the city, just radio broadcasts and word of mouth. If you weren't listening to Coma, you might not know until you looked outside and saw the sky turning the wrong color. At 3:30, Coma radio's announcer's voice took on urgency. Tornado on the ground heading towards South Oklahoma City. Woodlawn Park area appears to be in the direct path. If you live in South Oklahoma City, seek shelter immediately. Get to your cellar or interior room now. This is an extremely dangerous situation. 4:00 p.m. The sky turned green. That sickly, unnatural color that made experienced Oklahomans' blood run cold. Not dark gray like a normal storm. Not black like a thunderstorm. Green. The color of a fresh bruise. The color that meant rotation, meant power, meant death spinning down from the clouds. The air became absolutely still, not calm, still. The difference was profound. Birds stopped singing mid-note. Leaves hung motionless on trees. The pressure dropped so fast it made ears pop, made breathing difficult. Vernon Matthews stood in the yard of the Henderson house, watching the western horizon. He could see it now, a massive, dark funnel maybe 2 miles away. It looked like it was moving slowly, but that was an illusion created by distance and size. It was actually traveling 40 miles per hour, 3 minutes away, maybe less. He started running, house to house, pounding on doors. "Cellar! Get to your cellar now!" People scrambled. Families grabbed children, ran for their backyard cellars or interior rooms. Mothers screamed names. Fathers threw open cellar doors. Children cried. The Thompson family, Robert just waking from his sleep, still groggy from his night shift, grabbed both girls. Alice was screaming, "Now, now, get to the cellar now!" They ran through the backyard. Robert threw open the cellar door, those hinges Vernon had just oiled yesterday working smoothly. Margaret went down the ladder first, quick and nimble. Alice handed Dorothy down to her sister. "Stay together," Alice screamed over the growing roar. "Hold each other, don't let go." Margaret grabbed Dorothy's hand in the darkness of the cellar. Dorothy was crying, terrified. Margaret held her tight. "It's okay," Margaret whispered, even though she was scared too. "We're safe. We're underground. It can't get us here." She believed that. Everyone believed that. Storm cellars kept you safe. That's what they were for. 3 houses down, Ruth Harrison grabbed Sammy, tried to run for their cellar. But Sammy froze at the door, terrified by the sound, by the pressure, by something in the air that his sensitive mind could feel but couldn't process. He went rigid, stopped moving. Ruth was pulling him, crying, begging. "Sammy, please, please, baby, we have to go down." Vernon Matthews appeared, running through the yard. "I'll help," he shouted over the roar. He lifted Sammy. The boy was light, easy to carry, and headed toward the cellar entrance. Ruth followed, sobbing with relief. "Thank you, thank you." At 7:01 South Walker, Jimmy Carver's stepmother Diane screamed for him to come inside. But Jimmy, angry about being punished earlier for talking back, was hiding in the tool shed, being defiant, proving a point, showing her she couldn't control him. He didn't move, didn't respond to her screams. At 623 South Walker, Helen Foster was gathering her 3 younger children, screaming for Carolyn to get up, come downstairs to the cellar. But Carolyn, dizzy with fever, weak from being sick, was moving slowly. Everything felt like it was happening underwater. At 4:45 South Walker, Old Man Pritchard was already in his deep cellar, door closed and locked from inside, sitting in the dark with his can of beans and his flask of whiskey, waiting it out alone, the way he always waited out storms. Self-sufficient, untrusting, prepared. 4:17 p.m. The tornado touched down at the southern edge of Woodlawn Park, and the world ended in 18 minutes. 18 minutes of hell. The tornado that struck Woodlawn Park at 4:17 p.m. on April 9, 1947, was an F4 monster. 3/4 of a mile wide at its base. Winds measured later at 210 miles per hour. It stayed on the ground for 18 minutes, tracking directly through the heart of the neighborhood along South Walker Avenue like a scythe cutting through wheat. The sound was described by survivors as something beyond human experience. Worse than war, they said. Worse than factory explosions or train wrecks or anything they'd ever heard. A freight train combined with a jet engine combined with the screaming of 1,000 people all at once. The wind pressure alone collapsed eardrums. Windows exploded inward, sending glass shrapnel through homes at bullet speed. Roofs lifted off in single pieces, spinning hundreds of feet into the air before crashing down blocks away. Robert Henderson, who survived in his cellar, later gave testimony to investigators. "I heard Mrs. Patterson screaming for her baby. She was above ground when it hit. She'd gone back for something, I don't know what. I heard her voice for maybe 3 seconds. Then the sound just ate it, swallowed it whole. When I climbed out after, her house was gone. Just the foundation and her rocking chair, sitting perfect on the concrete slab, still rocking from the wind, still moving. Like she'd just stood up. They never found Mrs. Patterson's body. The tornado had thrown her where nobody knew. The tornado killed 116 people in those 18 minutes. Most died instantly, crushed by collapsing homes, impaled by debris, fence posts, 2x4s, tree branches driven through walls, through bodies, through anything in their path. 3 children died when their school bus was picked up and thrown 400 yards, tumbling through the air like a toy before slamming into the ground upside down. An entire family of 7 died when their house collapsed into their cellar. The cellar was supposed to keep them safe. Instead, it became their tomb, tons of brick and wood and furniture crushing down, blocking the entrance, trapping them inside. Rescue workers found them 3 days later. Too late. Much too late. The tornado didn't discriminate. Didn't care if you were good or bad, young or old, prepared or not. It took the Henderson family's youngest son, but left their oldest daughter untouched. It destroyed 5 houses on 1 block, but left the 6th standing. It killed the priest, but spared the atheist. There was no logic, no pattern, just chaos and violence and death spinning through the neighborhood at 210 miles per hour. 43 people were injured severely enough to require hospitalization. Broken bones, punctured lungs, traumatic brain injuries, deep lacerations. 2 would die later from their injuries in the hospital, bringing the eventual death toll to 118. But that number would have an asterisk, because 6 people would simply vanish. In the immediate aftermath, Woodlawn Park ceased to exist as a neighborhood. It became a debris field, a wasteland, a place where 134 homes had stood that morning, and by evening only foundations remained. Telephone lines were down, every single pole sheared off at ground level. Power lines sparked and started fires in the rubble. A gas main ruptured at the north end, filling the air with the stink of natural gas, threatening explosion. Fire trucks couldn't reach the area for nearly an hour. Roads were blocked by collapsed homes, overturned cars, massive trees torn from the ground and thrown across streets. The tornado had mixed everything together like a giant had picked up the neighborhood, shaken it, and dumped it back out. You'd find pieces of the Henderson house 3 blocks south, mixed with fragments of the Patterson house and the Carver house, and houses that no longer had names because nobody remembered who'd lived there. Mrs. Foster's china cabinet, still intact, plates unbroken, landed on the roof of the First Baptist Church a quarter-mile north. How it got there without shattering, nobody could explain. A child's doll was found embedded in a telephone pole, driven 6 inches into the wood by the force of the wind. It was impossible to tell where one house ended and another began, Fire Chief William Morse reported later. We couldn't even figure out where the roads used to be. Everything was just mixed, broken, unrecognizable. The most critical problem, nobody knew who was where when the tornado hit. Some families had been in their cellars, others in their homes. Some had run to neighbors' houses with deeper cellars. Jimmy Carver's stepmother thought he was in the cellar with her. She'd assumed he'd come down when the tornado hit. He'd actually been in the tool shed, knocked unconscious by falling debris. They found him 3 hours later, buried under collapsed wood, alive. Lucky. One of the lucky ones. Communication was impossible. Families were separated. Children wandered through the rubble, looking for parents, crying, bleeding. Parents wandered screaming names until their voices gave out. And in this chaos, in these first terrible hours, Vernon Matthews moved through the rubble, helping, always helping. People saw him pulling boards off collapsed cellars, saw him digging with his bare hands, saw him carrying injured children to the first aid station the Red Cross set up, saw him working tirelessly, covered in dust and blood, sometimes his own, sometimes other people's. "Matthews saved my daughter," one man told investigators later. "She was trapped under our kitchen table. He dug her out, carried her to safety. I don't know what we would have done without him." Dozens of people said the same thing. Vernon Matthews was a hero that day, working when others were in shock, strong when others were weak, present when others had fled. Nobody suspected. Why would they? Quick question before we continue. Have you subscribed yet? If not, hit that button now. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds, and leave a comment telling me what you're thinking so far. In the chaos of those first hours, this is what happened to each person who would eventually be listed as missing. Dorothy Mae Thompson was last seen by her sister Margaret at approximately 4:16 p.m., just before the tornado struck. They were in the cellar together, holding hands in the darkness. Margaret remembers Dorothy gripping tight, crying, whispering, "I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared." When the tornado passed overhead, the sound was so loud, Margaret thought her eardrums would burst. Something hit their cellar, debris falling through the entrance, the wooden doors blown off their hinges. Margaret felt pain, saw stars, blacked out briefly. When she came to, seconds later, maybe minutes, she couldn't tell, Dorothy was gone. The cellar was dark. Margaret screamed her sister's name, climbed the ladder, emerged into a world that no longer existed. Her house was gone. Just the foundation remained. She stood on what used to be her front porch and screamed, "Dorothy! Dorothy Mae!" No answer. Margaret assumed Dorothy had climbed out. During those few seconds, Margaret was unconscious, assumed she'd gone looking for their parents, assumed she was wandering somewhere in the debris, scared and hurt but alive. She never suspected the truth. Sammy Harrison was last seen by his mother Ruth at approximately 4:15 p.m. Vernon Matthews had helped carry Sammy toward their cellar. Ruth went down the ladder first, reaching up to take Sammy from Vernon's arms. Vernon was handing him down when the first debris hit. A section of roof from somewhere, flying horizontally like a blade. Vernon ducked. Ruth ducked. In that split second of chaos, Sammy was gone. Ruth climbed back up, screaming his name. Nothing, just wind and darkness and destruction. "Sammy! Sammy, where are you?" She assumed he'd run in panic. Sammy did that sometimes when overwhelmed, bolted, ran without thinking, hid somewhere until the fear passed. She spent the next 6 hours searching, digging through rubble with bleeding hands, screaming his name until her voice was gone. She never found him. She never suspected he'd been taken. Carolyn Foster was last seen by her mother Helen at approximately 4:16 p.m. Helen had gathered the 3 younger children, was screaming for Carolyn to hurry downstairs to the cellar. But Carolyn, dizzy with fever, weak from being sick for 2 days, was moving slowly. Everything felt disconnected. Her legs wouldn't work right. Helen made a terrible choice, the kind of choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She took the 3 younger ones down to the cellar first, intended to come right back for Carolyn. But the tornado hit before she could. The world exploded. The cellar door slammed shut. Helen held her 3 children in the darkness, praying, crying. When she emerged 20 minutes later, her entire house was gone, erased. She found her 3 younger children in the cellar, terrified but alive. She never found Carolyn. She assumed Carolyn had been thrown by the wind, blown away, carried off, killed somewhere in the debris field. It happened to other people. Why not her daughter? She never suspected that Carolyn had survived the tornado itself, that death came later. That death came from a neighbor. Old Man Pritchard was not seen by anyone that day. He lived alone. His house was completely destroyed. Nothing but the foundation remained, just like 130 other houses. His storm cellar entrance was blocked by a massive oak tree that had fallen directly across it, roots and all. The trunk was 4 feet in diameter, impossible to move without equipment. Neighbors assumed he'd died in the cellar. Maybe the tree falling had crushed the entrance. Maybe he'd suffocated. Maybe he'd had a heart attack from fear. He was 72 after all, not young. They couldn't get to the cellar for 3 days. The tree was too large, equipment too limited. Emergency crews were focused on finding survivors. not checking on old men who probably died instantly. When they finally cut through the tree on April 12th and opened the cellar, they found it empty, completely empty. Not a body, not a trace, just Pritchard's neatly stored supplies, canned goods still on shelves, blankets folded, water containers untouched, and the ladder leading up to the cellar door, which opened into his now-gone kitchen, was still in place. It appeared Pritchard had climbed out at some point, but when, and where did he go? The cellar should have been his salvation, should have kept him safe. Instead, it became a tomb for 4 other people. And here's the detail that would haunt investigators for decades. Vernon Matthews was seen by dozens of people in the immediate aftermath, helping, digging, pulling people from rubble, carrying injured children, comforting survivors. He worked tirelessly for 6 hours until around 10 p.m. when darkness made search efforts impossible. Then he went back to his rented room at the Henderson house. The house was damaged, one wall collapsed, roof partially gone, but still partially standing. He went inside, presumably to sleep. The next morning he was gone. His room was cleaned out, everything gone. His clothes, his tools, his few possessions. Including, investigators would realize years later, a shovel, a pickaxe, and a lantern that belonged to the Hendersons. His landlord assumed he'd left town, overwhelmed by the devastation, like several other residents did. People fled Woodlawn Park in those first days. Too many memories, too much death. Nobody thought much of Vernon leaving. He was an odd job worker, a drifter. Of course he'd move on. Nobody suspected. Nobody even questioned. Not until 77 years later, when a construction crew uncovered what Vernon had left behind. The search that found nothing first 24 hours, April 9-10, 1947. In the first 24 hours after the tornado, the focus was on rescue, not recovery. Every second counted. Fire crews, police officers, volunteers, and military personnel from Tinker Air Force Base worked frantically to find survivors buried in rubble. And they found them. 37 people alive in those first 12 hours. Trapped in cellars with blocked entrances, pinned under collapsed walls but protected by furniture. Unconscious under debris, breathing shallowly, barely alive but alive nonetheless. Every rescue was a miracle. Every survivor pulled from the wreckage gave hope that maybe more would be found. But as night fell, the reality set in. The death toll climbed. 83 dead. Then 95. Then 103. By midnight, 116 confirmed dead. And some people simply weren't being found at all. Alice Thompson wandered the debris field like a ghost, screaming for Dorothy. Her voice went hoarse, then broke, then faded to a whisper. Margaret, bandaged and in shock, held her mother's hand. Robert Thompson dug with his bare hands, pulling away boards and bricks and shattered glass. His hands bled. He didn't notice, didn't care. "She's small," Alice screamed at every rescue worker she found. "Blonde hair, 8 years old. Gingham dress. Have you seen her? Have you seen my baby?" Nobody had. Ruth Harrison did the same, moving from rescue crew to rescue crew, grabbing arms, looking into faces. "Red hair, 6 years old, he doesn't talk much. His name is Sammy. Please, have you seen him?" Nobody had. Helen Foster searched for Carolyn, sobbing, holding her 3 younger children close because she couldn't lose them too. 14, tall, brown hair. She had a fever, she was weak, she couldn't have gone far. Nobody had seen her. By dawn on April 10th, hope was fading. The rescue operation was transitioning to recovery. They were no longer looking for survivors. They were looking for bodies. 24-48 hours, April 10-11, 1947. The official count, 116 confirmed dead. But the count was complicated. Many bodies were unidentifiable, crushed beyond recognition, burned in the gas fires, torn apart by the tornado's violence. The county brought in temporary refrigerated trucks to store remains, started the grim work of identification, dental records, jewelry, distinctive scars or birthmarks, anything that could give a name to the dead. Oklahoma City hospitals reported 43 severely injured, 18 treated and released, 2 critical would die later. The Red Cross set up a temporary shelter at Central High School. 287 people were displaced, homeless, everything they owned destroyed, nowhere to go. On April 11th, the police compiled an initial missing persons list. 7 names: Dorothy Mae Thompson, age 8, Samuel Harrison, age 6, Carolyn Foster, age 14, Amos Pritchard, age 72, Vernon Matthews, age 34, Elizabeth Granger, age 52, Thomas Walsh, age 19. By April 12th, they found Elizabeth Granger's body, thrown nearly half a mile from her house, found in a drainage ditch identified by her wedding ring. Thomas Walsh was found on April 13th, died in the collapse of the general store where he worked, buried under shelving that took 3 men to lift. The list was now 5 names, 5 people who had vanished. 48 to 72 hours. April 11th to 12, 1947. Search dogs were brought in, bloodhounds from Texas, trained to find people buried in rubble or wandering in shock. They searched the debris field in grids, handlers watching for any sign of interest, any indication the dogs had caught a scent. The dogs found nothing. No scent trails for Dorothy, Sammy, or Carolyn. No trace of Old Man Pritchard. No trail for Vernon Matthews. It was as if they'd never existed. On April 12th, Detective Frank Morrison of Oklahoma City Police began conducting extensive interviews with neighbors. The timeline became clearer. Dorothy was in the cellar with Margaret, then disappeared during a brief moment when Margaret was unconscious. Sammy was with Vernon Matthews and his mother, disappeared in the seconds before the tornado hit. Carolyn was alone in her house upstairs, never seen again after her mother went to the cellar. Pritchard's cellar was empty when they finally opened it, suggesting he'd left at some point. Matthews was seen working until 10 p.m., then vanished by morning. Detective Morrison interviewed Vernon Matthews' landlord, Mr. Henderson. "Did Vernon seem upset, disturbed?" Morrison asked. Mr. Henderson shook his head. He was sitting in his damaged living room, one wall missing, covered with a tarp. "No more than anyone else. We're all disturbed." But Vernon was quiet. He's always quiet, helpful though, always helping. "Did he mention leaving, say anything about going somewhere?" "No, but Vernon came and went. That's how he was. He worked odd jobs, sometimes in other towns. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week, then come back." Morrison made notes. "Did he have any family, anyone we could contact?" "Not that I know of. He kept to himself. Good tenant, though. Paid rent on time." Morrison interviewed everyone Vernon had helped in the aftermath. Everyone said the same thing. Vernon was kind, tireless, helpful. Nobody saw him do anything suspicious. "He helped me pull my wife from the rubble," one man said, tears streaming down his face. "She was trapped under a beam. Vernon lifted it while I pulled her out. Saved her life. I don't understand why he'd just leave without saying anything." Unless, Morrison thought but didn't say out loud, he had a reason to leave. Unless he was running from something. But what and why? If you're still with me, drop a comment below and tell me what you think happened. Do you have theories? And make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a dark turn. 77 years of silence. First months, April to August 1947. The FBI became involved in early May. Missing children could mean abduction. Could mean someone used the chaos to take victims. It was rare, but it happened. Disaster predators existed, people who exploited tragedy for their own purposes. FBI agents interviewed hundreds of people, searched neighboring states, tracked down Vernon Matthews' background as thoroughly as 1947 records allowed. What they found: Vernon Dale Matthews, born 1913 in Amarillo, Texas, worked oil fields, various manual labor jobs across Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. No criminal record, no arrests, no family anyone could locate, no permanent address before Woodlawn Park in 1945. He was a ghost, but that wasn't unusual. The Depression had created thousands of men like that, drifters who worked where they could, avoided paperwork, used different names in different towns, men who fell through the cracks of society and nobody noticed because nobody was looking. The FBI searched for months, checked hospitals, checked morgues in every surrounding state, checked employment records at construction sites, oil fields, ranches. Nothing. Vernon Matthews had vanished as completely as his alleged victims. The other missing were equally inexplicable. Dorothy Mae Thompson, too young to have wandered far. Searches extended 5 miles in every direction. Nothing. Samuel Harrison, developmentally delayed, wouldn't have gone far from his mother. Couldn't have survived alone. Nothing. Carolyn Foster, sick, weak, likely disoriented, couldn't have gotten far without help. Nothing. Amos Pritchard, elderly, possibly injured, but his cellar was empty. Did he climb out and wander away, confused? Did he die somewhere and animals scattered his remains? Possible, but no trace. By August 1947, the investigation stalled. The FBI closed the case. No evidence of abduction, no evidence of foul play. Official conclusion: presumed victims of the tornado, bodies unrecovered or destroyed. First year, 1947 to 1948. On April 9, 1948, Woodlawn Park held a memorial service, or what was left of Woodlawn Park. The neighborhood was being rebuilt, but slowly. Many lots remained empty. Most original residents had moved away. 116 names were read aloud at the service, the confirmed dead. Then, 5 more names, spoken more quietly with more uncertainty: Dorothy Mae Thompson, Samuel Harrison, Carolyn Foster, Amos Pritchard, Vernon Matthews. Taken by the storm, the pastor said, gone from this earth, but not from our hearts. We commit them to God's mercy. Alice Thompson sobbed through the entire service. Margaret, now 12, held her mother. Robert Thompson stood silent, broken, a man who'd aged 10 years in one. Ruth Harrison didn't attend. She couldn't. She still believed Sammy was alive somewhere, lost maybe, confused, looking for her. She couldn't give up hope, couldn't accept that her sweet boy was gone. Helen Foster attended with her 3 surviving children. She would never forgive herself, never escape the guilt. She'd made a choice: save 3, lose 1. The right choice maybe, the only choice, but it didn't matter. Carolyn was gone, and it was her fault. 5 empty coffins were buried in Oklahoma City Cemetery. Symbolic. Grief without closure. Names on headstones with no bodies beneath. Years 2 through 5, 1949 to 1952. Life moved on, as it always does, as it must. Woodlawn Park was rebuilt. New homes, new families. Some original residents stayed, unable or unwilling to leave. But most left. Too many ghosts, too many memories, too much pain embedded in the soil. The Thompson family moved to Tulsa. Robert found work at another packing house. Alice never recovered. She became withdrawn, depressed, barely functional. Margaret essentially raised herself. She vowed to never forget Dorothy. Every April 9th she lit a candle, said her sister's name out loud so it wouldn't be forgotten. Ruth Harrison remained in Oklahoma City but moved to a different neighborhood. She never remarried, never had other children. She worked as a seamstress until arthritis made it impossible. She died in 1983, age 74, never knowing what happened to Sammy. On her deathbed, her last words were his name. Helen Foster moved her family to Kansas City. The guilt consumed her. She drank heavily. Her marriage failed. Her 3 surviving children grew up shadowed by the sister they couldn't save, the choice their mother made, the weight of survivors' guilt. The case grew cold. Detectives retired. Files were archived. Moved to dusty rooms in basement storage. Forgotten. Years 5 through 77, 1952 to 2024. Decades passed like water. Occasionally, someone asked questions. A journalist writing a retrospective piece on the 50th anniversary of the tornado. A true crime podcast in 2019 that explored the missing people suggested maybe Vernon Matthews was a predator who used the chaos to abduct victims. But there was no evidence, just speculation, just theories. Margaret Thompson, now Margaret Ellen after marriage and divorce, returned to Oklahoma City in 1998. She was retired, living alone. She started visiting the Woodlawn Park site, which had become an empty lot. Undeveloped, weedy. The city owned it, but hadn't done anything with it for decades. Every April 9th she stood where her childhood home once stood, where she last saw Dorothy alive. She'd bring flowers, say her sister's name, remember. She wrote letters to the Oklahoma City Police Department, asking them to reopen the investigation. They politely declined. No new evidence. Nothing we can do. We're sorry for your loss. She wrote to the FBI. Same response. She wrote to the mayor, the governor, the local news. Nobody cared about a 77-year-old case. Nobody wanted to dig up ancient pain. Until 2024. Until the city finally decided to develop the lot. Until a backhoe operator named Miguel Sanchez, excavating the southeast corner, uncovered something that shouldn't exist. A storm cellar that wasn't on any map. Locked from the outside. Sealed for 77 years. The door opens, April 15th, 2024, 10:30 a.m. Miguel Sanchez had been operating heavy machinery for 23 years, excavated countless sites, uncovered old foundations, forgotten wells, unmarked graves. He knew construction, knew the weight of earth, knew when something felt wrong. The backhoe's bucket caught on something solid, not concrete, not stone. Wood, old wood, reinforced with metal. He stopped the machine, climbed down, brushed away dirt with his gloved hands. It was a storm cellar door. Heavy oak, iron hinges rusted but intact, built like a bomb shelter, and it was locked from the outside. A massive padlock, corroded orange with rust but still holding, connected to a chain wrapped multiple times around the door handles. Miguel stood up, looked around the site. "Derek," he called to his foreman, "you need to see this." Derek Price came over, looked down at what Miguel had uncovered. His expression changed. "That's not on the city plans," Derek said quietly. They called the site manager. The site manager called the city planning office. The city planning office checked records from 1947, pulling up old property maps on microfiche. "There's no cellar registered at this location," the city planner said over the phone. "Wait, there was an Amos Pritchard who lived around there. Old coal miner. He had a famous cellar, deep one, reinforced, but according to records his house was at 445 South Walker. What you're looking at would be 30 yards south of where his house should have been." "Could the records be wrong?" the site manager asked. "They could be. Records from 1947 aren't perfect. Could also be an illegal cellar someone dug and never registered. Happened a lot back then during the Depression and war years." By 11 a.m. a crowd had gathered. Construction workers on break, curious neighbors, a local news crew that happened to be filming a story about the new development nearby. At 11:15 a.m., Margaret Ellen Thompson arrived. Someone had called her. She was on a local historical society list as a Woodlawn Park survivor, one of the last living people who'd been there that day. She pushed through the crowd, her 88-year-old body moving slower than she wanted, and looked down at the cellar door. Her breath stopped. "That's Pritchard's cellar," she whispered. "I recognized the door. He was so proud of it. Made it himself." Derek turned to her gently. "Ma'am, the records say Old Man Pritchard's house was—" "I know where his house was." Margaret's voice was firm despite her age. "I lived 3 houses down for 10 years, but this is his cellar. I'd know that door anywhere. He showed it to all the neighborhood kids once. Said it could survive anything." The site manager pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Why?" someone asked. "It's just an old cellar." The site manager pointed at the padlock. "Because storm cellars are supposed to be locked from the inside, not the outside. That's how they work. You go in during a storm, lock yourself in for safety. He shook his head. "This was locked from outside, deliberately. Someone sealed this cellar shut." The crowd went quiet. Everyone understood what that might mean. 12:30 p.m. Oklahoma City police arrived. Detective Sarah Chen, age 34, from the cold case unit. She'd heard about the 1947 tornado. Everyone in OCPD learned about it during training, the department's darkest day. But she didn't know the details about the missing people. That was before her time, way before. She examined the cellar door, the padlock, the chain, took photographs from multiple angles. "This was locked deliberately," she said. "From outside. Recently?" Miguel shook his head. "That lock's as old as the door. Same rust, same wear. Been there for decades." Chen radioed for bolt cutters. While they waited, she asked Margaret questions, taking notes on a small pad. "You lived here in 1947? "Yes. 412 South Walker Avenue, 3 houses north of Old Man Pritchard." "You knew him?" "Not well, nobody did. He kept to himself. But everyone knew his cellar. It was famous. Deepest in the neighborhood." Margaret paused. "He survived the tornado. Or we thought he did. His house was destroyed, but his cellar should have kept him safe. But he was listed as missing." "Yes, they opened his cellar 3 days after the tornado. Took that long to cut through the tree that fell on it. When they finally got it open, the cellar was empty. They figured he'd climbed out, wandered away in shock, died somewhere in the debris. His body was never found." "And your sister?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Dorothy May, age 8. She was with me in our cellar when the tornado hit. I was knocked unconscious for a few seconds. When I woke up, she was gone. We searched for days. Never found her. The bolt cutters arrived. An officer positioned them on the padlock, squeezed. The rusted metal resisted. He tried again and again. On the 4th try, The lock snapped with a crack that made everyone jump. They unwrapped the chain. Took 3 men to do it. The links were so heavy, wrapped so many times. Finally, they lifted the door. It took all 3 of them. The door was incredibly heavy, counterbalanced, but still massive. It opened slowly, hinges screaming with rust and age. The smell hit them immediately. Not decay, it had been too long for that, but the smell of old earth. Stale air that hadn't moved in decades, and something else, something wrong, something that made Detective Chen's instincts scream. She shined her flashlight down into the darkness. The cellar was deep, at least 15 feet. Wooden ladder descending into blackness. At the bottom she could see shapes, hard to make out from this angle. "I'm going down," she said. "Detective, we should wait for—" "I'm going down now." She descended carefully. The ladder was old but solid. Pritchard had built things to last. Each rung creaked but held her weight. At the bottom, she turned on her high-powered flashlight, the beam cutting through decades of darkness, and froze. The cellar was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, reinforced walls, shelves along one side still holding rusted cans, rotted blankets, a small table, a wooden chair on its side, and in the corner, arranged almost carefully, almost respectfully, were bones. 4 sets of remains, 3 very small, child-sized, 1 larger, adult-sized, but not tall. A woman or a small man. Chen's training kicked in. She didn't touch anything, didn't move, just photographed everything with her phone. Dozens of photos from every angle. Then climbed back up the ladder, her legs shaking. At the surface, she spoke into her radio, her voice steady, despite what she'd just seen. "This is Detective Chen. I need the medical examiner at this location immediately, and call the FBI. We just found human remains, multiple sets. I think—" She paused. "I think we just solved a 77-year-old case." Margaret Ellen Thompson, standing at the edge of the crowd, heard these words. Her legs gave out. 2 construction workers caught her before she hit the ground. "Dorothy," she whispered, "is my baby sister down there?" Detective Chen looked at her with profound sadness, professional distance mixed with human compassion. "Ma'am, I can't confirm anything yet, but there are remains. 4 sets, 3 children, 1 adult." Margaret started sobbing. Deep, racking sobs that came from 77 years of grief, 77 years of wondering, 77 years of not knowing. Now she knew. After 77 years, she was going to bring Dorothy home. Before we continue with what they found in that cellar, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Share this video. This is a story that needs to be told, and comment below. Tell me what you're feeling right now. The truth emerges April 15, 2024. What was found? The Oklahoma City Medical Examiner's Office worked around the clock. The remains were carefully excavated from Pritchard's cellar. Each bone photographed in place, each fragment mapped and documented before being moved. This wasn't just a recovery. This was a crime scene. And after 77 years, they couldn't afford to miss anything. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, had worked hundreds of cases, but she'd never worked one this old. What her team found remains. Marker 1. Female, age 6 to 8, height approximately 4'2". Cause of death: massive blunt force trauma to the posterior skull. Time of death: April 1947, determined by soil samples, degradation patterns, and historical context. Dental records, miraculously still on file, matched Dorothy Mae Thompson. Near the remains, fragments of a gingham dress, yellow checks on white fabric, and buttons. 203 of them, scattered in the dirt where her body had fallen. Some still in a rusted blue tin. Dorothy's collection, the treasure she'd counted every morning, the last thing she'd carried when she died. Remains number 2, male, age 5 to 7, height approximately 3'10". Cause of death: manual strangulation. Hyoid bone fractured, consistent with direct pressure to the throat. Time of death: April 1947. Dental records matched Samuel "Sammy" Harrison. Around his skeletal neck, a small wooden cross on a rotted string. His mother had put it on him that morning. Said a prayer, kissed his forehead. The cross was still there 77 years later. Remains the number 3, female, age 13-15, height approximately 5'6". Cause of death: severe blunt force trauma to the skull. Time of death: April 1947. Dental records matched Carolyn Foster. Near her remains remnants of a dress with a partially finished hem, the dress her mother Ruth Harrison had been making for her. The last thing Carolyn had worn. The fever dress. Remains number 4. Male, age 70-75, height approximately 5'8". Cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Bullet still lodged in the ribcage at .38 caliber. Time of death, April 1947. Dental records matched Amos Pritchard. In his skeletal hand, an empty revolver, his own gun, the one he'd kept in the cellar for protection. Additionally, scattered throughout the cellar, a shovel with trace DNA still viable after 77 years, protected by the sealed environment, a pickaxe, a lantern, fragments of rope, boot prints preserved in the dried mud floor. Dr. Rodriguez presented her findings to Detective Chen and the FBI agents, who'd arrived from the Oklahoma City field office. 4 victims, she said. 3 children murdered by blunt force trauma. 1 elderly man killed by gunshot. All died on or around April 9, 1947, and based on the evidence, they didn't all die at the same time. What do you mean? Chen asked. The positioning of the remains suggests they were placed here over a period of time. Hours, not all at once. And the gunshot victim, Pritchard, has defensive wounds on his forearms. He fought back, he struggled. Special Agent Michael Torres from the FBI leaned forward. So Pritchard was killed first, by someone who then used his cellar as a tomb for 3 children. That's my assessment. And the person who did this? Dr. Rodriguez pointed to the DNA report on the shovel. We got a hit. Vernon Dale Matthews. His DNA is in the system because he served briefly in the Army in 1943, dishonorably discharged for violent behavior. April 17 to 2024. The investigation accelerates. The FBI Cold Case Unit took over. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was a quadruple homicide. Murder had no statute of limitations. If Vernon Matthews was alive, he'd be 111 years old. Unlikely, but not impossible. More likely, he was long dead, but they still needed to know what happened. They reconstructed the timeline using forensic evidence and witness statements from 1947 police files that had been gathering dust in a storage room for decades. April 9, 1947, approximately 4:17 p.m. Tornado strikes Woodlawn Park. Chaos erupts for approximately 40 minutes. By 5:00 p.m. the tornado has passed. The neighborhood is devastated. April 9, 1947, approximately 4:50 p.m. Vernon Matthews reaches Pritchard's cellar through the secondary entrance, a ventilation shaft on the south side, partially hidden, not blocked by the fallen tree. He's carrying Sammy Harrison. Inside, he finds Amos Pritchard alive, armed with his revolver. What happened next was reconstructed from forensic evidence. Pritchard saw Matthews with the terrified child, saw something wrong in Matthews's eyes, something that made a man who'd survived mining accidents, who'd seen death up close, reach for his gun. "Get out," Pritchard said. "Leave the boy and get out." But Matthews rushed him. They struggled. The gun fired once. The bullet entered Pritchard's chest, fatal but not instantly. He'd survive for minutes, maybe longer, bleeding internally. Matthews took the gun. Sammy started screaming. Matthews strangled the child to silence the noise, 6 years old, red hair, freckles, gone in minutes. April 9, 1947, approximately 5:30 p.m. Matthews left the cellar through the ventilation shaft, emerging into the chaos. Nobody noticed. Everyone was focused on survival, on finding loved ones, on digging through rubble. He found Dorothy Mae Thompson wandering near where her house used to be. She was crying, disoriented, looking for her mother. Margaret was unconscious in their collapsed cellar. Her parents were searching 3 houses away in the wrong direction. "Dorothy," Matthews said, his voice calm, friendly. "I'm here to help. Come with me. I'll take you to your mama." Dorothy, 8 years old, terrified, trusting, went with him. He took her to Pritchard's cellar. She saw Sammy's body. She saw Pritchard dying on the floor. She started screaming. Matthews hit her with a piece of broken wood. Blunt force trauma. She died instantly, still clutching her blue tin of buttons. April 9, 1947, approximately 7 p.m. Matthews continued moving through the debris field, still helping people, still appearing normal, looking for another opportunity. He found Carolyn Foster wandering, feverish, disoriented, weak. Her family was searching, but in the wrong direction. easy to misdirect in chaos. "Carolyn," Matthews said, "your mother sent me to find you. Come with me. She's worried." Carolyn, sick and confused, believed him. He led her to the cellar. She saw the bodies. She tried to run. She didn't make it. Blunt force trauma, 14 years old, gone. April 9, 1947, approximately 8:10 FATS p.m. Matthews sealed the cellar. He climbed out the ventilation shaft, pulled debris over it to hide it. Then he accessed the main entrance, the one blocked by the oak tree. He dug away enough debris to reach the door from outside, opened it from within, climbed out, then locked it from the outside with Pritchard's padlock and a chain he'd found in the rubble. He piled debris over the entrance, making it look like part of the destruction. Then he continued helping until 10:00 p.m. Multiple witnesses saw him working tirelessly, moving rubble, comforting survivors. A hero. At 10:00 p.m., he went to his rented room, packed his belongings, took tools from the Henderson shed, a shovel, pickaxe, lantern, maybe intending to return later, move the bodies permanently, bury them elsewhere. But he never came back. At dawn, he was gone. The suspect. The FBI uncovered Vernon Matthews' real background. Born Vernon Dale Rourke in 1913, Amarillo, Texas. Changed his name to Matthews in 1944 after being dishonorably discharged from the Army for violent altercations with fellow soldiers. Psychological evaluation noted antisocial tendencies, lack of empathy, potential danger to others. Between 1944 and 1946, he worked in isolated oil fields where several workers went missing. Cases never solved, bodies never found. He was a predator. Not organized, not calculated, but opportunistic. And the tornado gave him the perfect opportunity. In December 2024, FBI agents found a photograph from a 1952 construction site in Nevada, a man matching Matthews' description. They believe he lived under various aliases for years, possibly dying in the 1960s or 1970s. His ultimate fate remains unknown, but his crimes, after 77 years, were finally revealed. Bringing them home May 2024, the funerals. Dorothy Mae Thompson was buried beside her parents in Tulsa on May 3, 2024. Her mother Alice had died in 1962, her father Robert in 1975, both never knowing what happened to their youngest daughter. Margaret Ellen Thompson, age 88, attended the funeral. She placed Dorothy's blue button tin in the casket before they closed it. She loved these buttons, Margaret said, her voice breaking. Counted them every morning. 203. She was so proud of her collection. The headstone reads, Dorothy Mae Thompson, 1939-1947. Beloved daughter and sister. Finally home, Samuel Harrison was buried beside his mother, Ruth, on May 5, 2024. Ruth had died in 1983, never knowing what happened to her sweet boy. Her headstone read, Loving mother of Sammy, even though she'd never been able to bury him. Now they were together. Sammy's surviving cousins attended. They were elderly now, in their 70s and 80s. They remembered Aunt Ruth's grief, how she'd never recovered, how she'd died still hoping Sammy was alive somewhere. She can rest now, one cousin said. They both can. Carolyn Foster was buried in Kansas City on May 8, 2024. Her mother Helen had died in 2001. Drank herself to death, the family said privately. The guilt had destroyed her. Carolyn's 3 surviving siblings attended the funeral. They were in their 80s now. They'd grown up in the shadow of the sister they couldn't save. Mom never forgave herself, Carolyn's younger sister said at the service. She chose us over Carolyn, the right choice maybe, the only choice, but it killed her inside. If she'd known the truth, that no choice would have saved Carolyn, that a monster took her anyway, maybe Mom could have forgiven herself. Amos Pritchard was buried with honors on May 10, 2024. The city of Oklahoma City posthumously recognized him as a hero. He'd died defending himself and attempting to protect Sammy Harrison. He'd fought back, struggled, tried to save a child even as he was dying. His headstone reads, Amos Pritchard, 1875-1947, Hero the Memorial. On April 9, 2025, 78 years after the tornado, Oklahoma City held a memorial service at the site of the former Woodlawn Park. A new plaque was unveiled. In memory of the Woodlawn Park tornado victims, April 9, 1947, 1:18, souls lost to nature's fury. But Dorothy Mae Thompson, Samuel Harrison, Carolyn Foster, and Amos Pritchard were stolen by human evil. They are not forgotten. Margaret Ellen Thompson, now 89, stood beside the plaque. She placed a button, one of Dorothy's 203, at its base. Dorothy loved collecting buttons, she said softly to the crowd. She'd have been 85 this year. She should have had a life. Children. Grandchildren. Maybe great-grandchildren. But a monster took that from her. She paused, wiped her eyes. But she's home now. After 77 years, we found her. We brought her home. And that matters. That matters so much. The lesson. The tragedy of Woodlawn Park is twofold. The tornado killed 118 people in 18 minutes. An act of nature. Horrible. Indiscriminate. But nature doesn't choose its victims, doesn't plan, doesn't hate. Vernon Matthews killed 4 more. An act of human evil. Deliberate. Calculated. Opportunistic. He used chaos as cover, used trust as a weapon, used helpfulness as camouflage. Nature can be survived with preparation, with cellars and warnings and luck. Evil is harder to escape, because evil looks normal, sounds helpful, acts friendly. Vernon Matthews was a neighbor, a handyman, someone people trusted enough to let him work on their property, help with their cellars, be alone with their families. Nobody suspected. Why would they? But even 77 years later, the truth emerged. The missing were found, justice imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless was served, and the families finally have peace. Margaret Ellen Thompson stands at the memorial every April 9th now, places a button at the base, says Dorothy's name out loud so it won't be forgotten. I waited 77 years, she says, but I got to bring her home. Not everyone gets that chance. She's right. Not everyone does. But Dorothy Mae Thompson, Samuel Harrison, Carolyn Foster and Amos Pritchard, after 77 years of silence, after 77 years of questions, after 77 years of grief, finally came home. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that truth matters even after decades, hit that like button. Subscribe, share this video. These people deserve to be remembered. Their story deserves to be told. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what you're thinking. Let's make sure Dorothy Mae, Sammy, Carolyn and Amos are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. And remember, even in our darkest moments, even 77 years later, the truth has a way of emerging into the light.